So, good morning, everyone. It's 11:03, and thank you for joining our March KMTF meeting. It's a really small, intimate group today, so please feel free to unmute your mics whilst we go through the introductions. I hope everyone can hear me properly. If you can't hear me, then just let us know via the chat box. Okay, I'm Yemisi. There seems to be a little bit of an echo. Let me try and figure that out. Can everyone still hear me? Great. Sorry about that. I'm Yemisi. I'm the KM specialist for TOPS, and I'll be hosting this meeting today. We'll start with a quick review of the agenda and then some introductions. Please.
I'm Michelle Shapiro. I'm the communications officer for.
Thank you both. Also, could we start in the order that you appear in the attendees pod? So, Deborah, would you like to just tell us what organization you're with? Deborah, can you hear us? Okay, Jenny?
Hi, everyone. I'm Jenny Conniff. I'm actually the regional focal point for the Task Partners. And we are affiliated with TOP, sitting with TOP. And we have a similar knowledge management type of function about tasks and programming. So I'm here to just see what.
Right. So I think we're getting a lot of feedback using the mic, so maybe we should just stay away from them. My apologies, and just use the chat box. I'm sorry, Jenny, about that. So we have Christy also from World Vision. Hi, Christy, and Deborah as well from FinTech, I think. Are you both there? Okay. So I'd now like to introduce you to today's presenter, Dr. Ina Erbe. Ina has over 22 years of experience in the training and e-learning field. In her work, she routinely manages and applies principles of adult learning in instructional design, and she established and successfully managed the first training departments at both SBB Broad Group and EYT Inc. A really cool fact that I learned about Ina is that she developed the first web-based Latvian language training course for the Foreign Service Institute. I thought that was pretty cool. And she's also developed accessible e-learning and other training products for U.S. government clients. And she's currently the Senior Director of Learning Technologies at ACDI Boca in DC. So you see that Ina is super qualified to lead this discussion on how we can successfully engage with adult learners. And I'll just turn it over to her now. Ina, are you there?
Yes. Can everyone hear me?
The technology isn't our friend today.
That is always the case. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, that's always the case. You get it right in test runs, and then when it's actual time for the meeting, there's always something that goes wrong. But that's just the nature of learning and technology. So thank you, everyone, and thank you, Yemisi, for the lovely introduction. Thank you for having me as well. I appreciate being here. I was hoping to go through a few discussion points and then have a few talks or discussions about what you found. We did the introductions. So what I wanted to do today was to discuss some challenges we face, or adult learners face. First, I wanted to identify what adult learners are. Then discuss some practical solutions and lessons learned that can help engage learners. And when I say practical, I mean something that we can do right away where we don't need to buy new software or change a whole process. Just small things that have worked well for me over the years, and that as technology becomes better, that we upgrade and continue working on. So the first question, who is an adult learner? I mean, an adult learner that's quite the broad definition. I mean, we all can be adult learners. When we think of learner and adult, we think of many different things. But typically, we talk about people over the age of 18 and people who are non-traditional students. And when I say non-traditional, I mean people who are not in university or not going to school. Most likely people who are in the workforce, and also who have different motivations and reasons to learn. So basically for us, I'm going to make the assumption that an adult learner for any of us and any of our audience or learners, that anybody who works and is in the workforce can be motivated to learn. Thus, our audience are adult learners, and their needs would be related to their job or how to make their job better or for their self-improvement so they can advance in their careers, hopefully within the same organization. That's a pretty broad definition, and there's many out there, but that's the assumption for this presentation. So basically, but what motivates adult learners? Back in January, when we did the TOPS FSN Knowledge Management meeting, I presented with World Vision on what are organizational challenges to learning. And there are bigger things that are much broader and perhaps impact the budget a bit more in terms of what works, what doesn't. But there's a big part of it that is about the individual. And as any of us know who've taken training, any kind of training, be it in class, online, we know what we like and what we don't like. And generally we want to get out of it what's in it for me. So I'll just go through a quick review of things you probably know about what makes it worth it for me to take any kind of training or a learning program, or how I want to get information or learn something. Generally, you have to have a desire to learn, and that can come with the need to learn. Desire to learn, for example, for ACDI VOCA, we have over 1,000 staff in the field, and some are definitely more interested in learning, and they will explore our learning management system. Some will take courses on their own. Some have finished, we have last mile learning project leadership courses. They'll take it upon themselves to better themselves. On the flip side, the need to learn would be related to training that is required. There's, of course, organizational-wide training on ethics or sexual harassment prevention that everyone must take. So whether or not you want to take it, it's a requirement. But that doesn't mean it has to, be boring and turn people off to training in general. Adults like the opportunity to learn by doing, because if I take a course and do something, as you all probably know, and then don't have a chance to use it, well, it's not really going to help me. But if I have the opportunity to do something and then I can immediately apply it, that's much more motivational. And also, when possible, to learn at your own pace. That's not always possible, but if someone can take a course or online training or even some sort of learning path at their own pace, that will be more motivational. Realistic challenges, that ties back to learning by doing. How does this relate to me in my job? As well as options on how to learn. And I'll get into that a bit more in terms when I talk about some of the practical solutions. One of my favorite quotes is by Benjamin Franklin. Tell me and I forget. No, that would be me, yes. Teach me and I remember. Well, for me, that would be sometimes. And involve me and I learn. And that's true. So that's a quick overview of some very broad adult learner motivations. Now, we all know this is true. We all have probably applied it, and, you know, this is all nice and theoretical, but the biggest challenge really is, even though we know this and have tried it, but there sometimes is a gap as to why isn't the staff participating or what's going on, and that comes down to the individual level. So before I go further into how I've grouped that, I wanted to take a moment and find out what you think. What have you seen on an individual level that are challenges to learners? This could be your own experience in learning, taking online learning or any training, or what you've seen if you've been implementing any type of training or knowledge sharing in your organization. And either, I guess, raise your hand or type in chat. And Sheila just said, please type your answer in the chat box. So I'll take a few moments just to get your thoughts going. There is no right or wrong answer. And oops, my next slide actually had the question. And,
so I think one of the challenging things for me, okay. So Jenny's saying, oh, everyone can see that, they're right. I find a major obstacle is what I think I already know.
So Jenny, are you saying like if you have to take a training but it's irritating because maybe you've already taken it, maybe it's something that you came to the workplace with, is that what you mean? And that it's just time, because we all are pressed for time, of course. If I didn't interpret that right, please correct me. Because I run into that too. And I see Deborah said, I get bored easily. I do much better with an interactive learning format. Yes, very true. That's very true. Ah, yes. Further, that's true. If you run through a course quickly, that's true. You might not understand it sufficiently if it's not reiterated or properly presented and reinforced as you go through it. And that's really something I will also talk about in terms of the onus is on the designer and the owner of the content of the course. Anybody else have some thoughts of what they find as a challenge or what they've seen others face? Pressed for time, definitely. I see a few more people are typing. Challenge to keep participants engaged and prioritize the learning, definitely. And that's always been a problem even before e-learning, especially sitting in a classroom with someone talking at you. Short attention spans. I've found myself counting window panes or ceiling tiles at some points in my training life. All right. I see a few more people are typing, and then we'll get into what the challenges are and how I've grouped them. All right. And Yemisi says too many resources options that you want to read them all. That can become overwhelming. Many presenters don't realize that they have to be interesting. Yes, Deborah, that's very true. People want to learn from peers, not experts. That's very true. It's hard to be talked at. All right. If no one else has any different thoughts or agreements, I think you all make some great points. That's very true, I think, universally for most people. So I'm going to move on to challenges of learner engagement, and we can go back to what you've said and fit those in. there's many common challenges as we see. And again, there's things that are organizational, and I see Sheila put where you can find the presentation I did with some of the World Vision staff in January. But looking more individually at each person, individually, there's so many different reasons that people learn differently. It could be the way you learn. Here in the U.S., we learn differently than other cultures. There's cultural learning. I know the staff we have in Bangladesh prefer to have someone talk in front of them. They don't always want to be interactive or especially take online learning, but we've been working on that. Language. I found that many things that we offer are, of course, in English, and we do try to translate, but as you know, things get lost in translation. And sometimes the cultural meaning of things, if the developer or the designer of a course or the subject matter expert is from another culture or from the U.S., then the designer or whoever's putting it together should be extra careful about that. So cultural learning style, I'm not good at just listening. Others I'm better at visual. When I was working at the FAA as a contractor, I found that all of them would rather hear their training than look at it. So other people like to be more involved. So there's different ways, different preferences for learning. And I see that Sheila wrote, culture plays a role in adult learning, and Deborah said, we are so used to speaking up in U.S. culture, this is not true for many cultures. Oh, that is so on point. For example, in our learning management and social learning platform, when I started at ACD Ivoca, we had a tab called Ask the Expert, which in the U.S. is, of course, very, you feel smart, or you think, you know, in our culture that's accepted that you ask questions and it shows that you're participatory. But our learning champions, we have a learning champion, which is my contact on each project, informed me that nobody wanted to post the question publicly because that just, to them, showed that they didn't know what they're doing. So, yes, very true. So that's a good example of an individual or personal preference. The next grouping from what I've seen is situational, things that aren't necessarily personal, but are individual to a person, such as access to technology. If you're out in the field, your internet might not work as well. You might have limited capabilities to access the internet. Your computers might be older. The programs you have might not be the same as maybe the headquarters. Also, of course, situational is time to train, as someone mentioned earlier. I think it was Sheila, about time to train. If we're working, as we all do, who has time to think about what they want to learn? Or that, oh, I'm going to spend some time looking up training to help myself. In other words, I need to finish my job. And I've heard that a lot, too, from our field staff, in that, well, I'd like to do that, but, and I think that's a universal truth, but that's a situational thing. You're in a job and that's your main priority. And finally, support, and that could be anything from IT support to how do you get to the course, to support in maybe the course is in English, or and you have a hard time with English, you might speak it, but the course might be written at a level that's too high, which leads me to the next point of training specific, and that's where I was talking about status of training, which we talked about earlier. Is it mandatory or is it self-motivated? The type of training that could influence someone's decision to take it, maybe it is an in-person class. That might be preferred. It could be online. Self-paced, for example, like any of if you're familiar with Skillsoft, courses that you open and take by yourself. They're self-run. It could be like a university setting. I don't know how many of you are familiar with eCornell, but they offer 2-week courses that can lead to a certificate, but those are spaced over 2 weeks. And there's an instructor, but it's not real-time. It is asynchronous, so that the learner can do the assignments and then participate in a discussion online that's not real-time. And that's good for a geographical challenge, which I think I forgot to say situational is geographical as well. And finally, training specific is communication about the training. Just because you put it up there does not mean people are going to come. Just describing it does not necessarily mean they're going to get motivated to take a training. Is it communicated how important it is to tie in with work? And that will be one of the solutions I talk about. Did anybody have questions before I move on to some of the solutions that I find that can be easy? I see that Sheila's written, people need tools to learn and adults need options for learning. That's definitely true. Any questions? Any further thoughts? Did this bring up any other challenges you might have experienced yourself or seen? See, Sheila's typing. Give it a minute. But the one thing, if you have limited resources, how do you decide what options to use? That's a great question, Sheila. And so some of the things, and when you say options, do you mean what types of training you offer, or is that what you meant by that question? Because what I'm thinking to talk about next are easy to implement solutions that will, gotcha, yeah. So what I want to present in terms of easy to implement solutions would be using what you have and how to motivate your learner without having to impact your budget or just impact your time, and even perhaps increase dialogue with your designers. Okay. So some easy to implement solutions, and easy is always a good word when time is concerned, but I've grouped them into what I call the 3 C's, which is communication, content, and collaboration. There's a few things grouped under it, and you might see that some of the things you mentioned will fit in here. I'll start with communication. One of the things I've found with communication and training, especially any kind of training, knowledge sharing, or even social learning, is that a message has to be put out more than once and in many different ways. So as the knowledge management person, or as the head of the training department, or even as the owner of a training, you have to wear many hats. It might also include working with different groups. So wearing many hats, I mean, you're the messenger. You talk about this new training is there. It's also a bit of marketing and also IT support. So let me talk a little more. Of course, we all know messaging and putting out, hey, we have a new course on how to make a basket. Okay, great, you've put it out there, but the audience with the different characteristics, be it culture, learning style, and of course their job interests, might say, oh, well, I don't really need to make a basket, so that's not for me. So you might want to start messaging ahead of time that this course is coming, and do a little marketing in that. If you have a communications or marketing group, work with them, communicate with them, and have them help you market it. The it takes a little more time, but what I do, what's worked for us is we had a mandatory ethics training last fall that lasted for 3 months time period. We started by communicating, having the CEO communicate this to our COPs and program managers in the field, as well as to our the senior management team at headquarters about a month ahead of time. Then we had a reminder that, hey, this is coming, this is what it entails, how long it is, because that's another big thing, explaining how long the training is so that people can fit it in. And then writing about how it is important to their job, that this is actually a required course, and we appreciate that you take it, and please consider it carefully as this will impact every single one of us in our work. And then, of course, as it came on, as we rolled it out, I also communicated and let my learning champions on each project know that you will have this coming, and I will work closely with you to make sure every staff member on the project has taken it. And I expected them to tell me who did not have internet connection so we could provide them an offline version. And then, of course, I worked with our communications group to put it out in their different messages and emails and newsletters. The IT support comes in because at that point I became IT help to every single person who could not access the course. And I'll answer your question in a sec, Sheila. The IT support part was not necessarily, it's easy to assume that it's either because they don't have internet or that it's user error, but there's so many different reasons maybe they can't open this self-paced, self-guided course. And yes, Sheila, the idea did come from leadership. That's just one example, and this was a required course. And I think this approach for communication would be slightly different if it was something new that is not required. And the IT support part, and that's the example I'm giving, we did keep learners in the loop in many different ways. We messaged in many different ways as well. I made we had a Learning Champion Challenge last year where the Learning Champions competed for specific things to help them understand what we have and how to help their staff. Part of it was to work with us in headquarters to ensure that people were able to take ethics. So the IT support, of course, there were different reasons someone couldn't open a course, and it had to do with different systems, but the communication in terms of being timely, as I helped people within 24 hours of their email and spent more time with some that seemed to experience more difficulties, or with the learning champion to help them, they opened up to the aspect of training, and I found that they were looking for other courses that were not required once they realized they could open it and what the issues were. So spending a little more time individually, albeit more time on my part, made it worthwhile to include others. So it's making each learner feel attended to. And then again, that's where I say it's the time of what you have and what your job role is. I see Ellen wrote her Learning Champions. So at ACDI VOCA, we have a person appointed that is not part of their job description on each of our projects who is the main point of contact for me and the staff learning and development team. And we meet once a month like this through Adobe Connect or Skype for Business, and we work with them to help the staff. We try to minimize their time because it is not part of their job description. I'm trying to work on that, but that has to go back up to leadership as well. But the fact that we have about 38 learning champions on our projects in about 25 countries, and it took about a year, 2 years to engage them, but as they started to see the value, they are now being the champions and the messengers and the marketing and the IT support on their projects in addition to their job. They see the value and they now can help me and staff learning and development message it further. Hopefully that answered your question. And then I can also help them with any IT. Yeah, it is cool, Ellen. I really enjoy working with them. And I learn a lot because it's a feedback loop. They tell me what works and what doesn't. So if they tell me we don't have internet or these people in the field don't, we have created a SharePoint site that they can get to download any required courses, save it to a USB drive, and present it to the people that way. And then it has to be a little more effort in letting us know. They have to track who finished it, and on trust they tell me, and we can mark it in the system and then get our stats. And so I see that Erin has asked, are there or what kind of systems are in place at ACDI VOCA to see that learning needs are identified and responded to? In terms of that, that would be the role of the learning champion, that I spend a lot of time interacting and communicating with them. We have our TLA group, and they have so to differentiate, maybe clarify a little more, staff learning development focuses solely on our internal staff. We do not focus on the projects. And we focus on staff, and we work with our technical learning people. So then if there's a need for something for a project, we might collaborate on that with each project or each of our technical learning folks, and TLA is technical learning. They're the ones that are specifically for the project on, for example, value chain or gender training. We will help with any of that kind of training as well. But we are so mostly focused on how our staff can better themselves to do their jobs better. So it is a lot of communication in a lot of different ways. And going back to Erin's question, it really is about finding out from the learning champions, and if anybody else has input. We certainly don't discourage any staff from emailing us at Staff Learning and Development at headquarters. But I've put out a survey for our learning champions with different choices of what their team, what the staff likes, what they don't like, how many can and can't get to the internet, and what they would be interested in. And some of them actually poll the staff as well to get me an answer. Others answer. So we slowly mold and reform what we have. And you might see that as I get into design or the content itself. I see Mary asked, is there an online platform where staff can access courses or training after they are provided? Some of the training we have is solely online. They're only the self-paced, self-motivated online courses. But we do try to present and get staff the content they need if it is offline. So we have a learning management system, and most of the time staff can go through and take a course as many times as they want. One thing, and I'll get to that when I get to content, is about providing job aids and printouts, as many cultures like that as well. And I have a good example for that. But we do have an online learning platform, learning management system, and a social learning platform where they access courses. If you do not have one, there's different approaches on how you can do that. So let's see. So that's the communication. So I'm going to get to content in a sec. Did anyone have any questions? And excuse me, I think the phone is ringing in my background. Please ignore that. All right, I don't see anyone typing. So I'm going to move down to the second C in content. What I've written here, analyze, design, deliver, implement, follow up, is really an instructional design model. If any of you are familiar with ADDIE, please raise your hand. Okay, well, in the world of instructional design, there's a framework called ADDIE, which is analyze, design, develop, implement, and evaluate. It's very broad. It was developed by the Department of Defense, I believe, back in the 70s. They have their own interactive media interaction guidelines, and the whole concept of it is knowing what you need, designing it so it's interesting, delivering it, implementing to make sure, and when I say deliver methods, you design and then you develop it, and then you implement it, and then you evaluate and you circle back and improve it, what was good, what was not. If you look up ADDIE, A-D-D-I-E, you'll probably find it in Wikipedia, anywhere. It's a framework, and it's generally used by many that design training. But success and access to content is much more than just the design of the training and the content. We want the content to be relevant. I know that I think it was Ellen or Jenny that said that if the content's not well presented, you might miss something and not know that you need to do more. You might just skim through it. I'm your typical content skimmer. I will read and then just click answers. So I try to develop training that is myself-proof. Not always easy. Not all content is interesting, but one really, it's not a new thing, but it's become a fad, and well, I don't know, fad, but it's become more focused on in training in terms of having things in shorter pieces, like little chunks of information as an alternative way. Instead of having one long 1-hour online course or having 1-hour online session, you chunk it out into more micro pieces. And that way, and provide job aids and even provide multiple ways to get to the content, be it you provide maybe a survey ahead of time, you have a small piece that's self-paced online, you follow up with something like this type of session where you have everyone joining in live. Hopefully people have taken or gone through the pre-training that goes back to time and issues of time. Providing things like job aids to support it. We just had a person in Ghana finish 6 modules of last mile learning, which on project leadership. And he wanted printout versions, which since it's online, we don't have the online versions, but we could direct him to where they were. Otherwise, if it's developed and there is no job aid, it might or might not be worth creating something that's paper-based or summary. But if you have a new training you're designing, come up with a summary sheet that you can hand out, the main points you want them to take away. Ellen asked, what is a good duration for content training? Sometimes it depends on the content itself. Way back when I worked at the Foreign Service Institute as a language teacher, the theory for adults is that adults can absorb information if in a classroom in 50-minute chunks, and then you have to take a break and move to something else. That's somewhat universal. I can't. If you have a training where it goes on for 2 hours, I'm sure that you all can relate that at some point you zone out, unless it's a very captivating presenter. But how much are you really going to remember? What are the main takeaways if you've gone to a 4 or 8 hour training, if it hasn't been broken out? One good training I've seen, thanks Sheila, I don't know how captivating I am, but there's so many examples of what kind of training. If it's online, I think people are, besides internet connectivity, people are afraid of that it's going to take too long. So small chunks. One new thing also I've seen is video. We don't really do video because of internet bandwidth issues, but we can create things using tools such as Captivate, Adobe Captivate, Articulate Storyline. There's a whole slew of tools like that, and those might require a bit of training, but there's also Articulate Presenter, which can take a PowerPoint slide. And even PowerPoint slides. I'm not a fan of PowerPoint, but I think that if you do PowerPoint correctly, you can make it interesting. It shouldn't be more than 3 minutes per slide, and of course I'm breaking my rule right now. But yeah, so the duration, 50 minutes is really about what an adult learner can absorb information in that time. And so from that, how you chunk out content might be by chapter, and if you have sub-modules within that, and it's also dependent on if there's a time frame where you need people to finish training. If there is a timeline that you need everyone to finish, let's say for our example ethics, within a certain amount of months, you might want them to set aside time or start when you message saying, please set aside an hour to take this training. And then print your certificate and give it to your HR person or something like that. Put the parameters around it. And Mary's saying we develop 3-minute videos embedded on YouTube. Yeah, that's a very good solution. It's something I think is a great idea. And I think using videos, even especially YouTube, that if you can integrate that with maybe Classroom, like if you have a series, at ACDI Avoca, we have an internal onboarding series at headquarters on how we work. It's a series of, I believe, 6, but something, and those are in-person sessions. But we can, some ideas we have to enhance it would be to add online self-directed trainings and videos or even job aids, and even live sessions to follow up. I see Jenny said find online self-directed training usually be extremely basic and hard to remember. So examples of good online training I might recommend for engaging design and teaching things that require strong analytical skills. What we do is we develop our own online training. A lot of the out-of-the-box trainings by groups such as Skillsoft is not customized enough, and they are pretty high level. So some good examples. Let me look up some that I think are interesting. I found, well, at one point as a government contractor, I had to do a series on different levels of interactivity of online training. And I found an online course for how to do knee surgery. Obviously, you weren't going to learn how to do knee surgery, but you learned the basics, and it was based with cartoons. Other good ideas to make online training more interesting is to make it into a story or have a narrator. One example that we can all do is to, let's say we have a new process. at one of the government agencies I worked, they were changing a process and wanted me to develop an online course. And I said, oh, yawn, that's going to be boring, because they had their process and someone could click each of the process points in the process map. And I said, that's not going to mean anything to anyone. So we switched it up to be a story of a manager and her staff in a meeting. And instead of going through what the process was, the meeting presented the process as, hey, we have a new process, and this is, this is how it's going to come out. And then the staff around the table could ask a question or ask questions, which I worked with our subject matter experts with. So it became a video story of, we have a new process, and someone saying, well, is this going to impact me, and are they going to be looking at my performance because of this process, and things that would be relevant to the staff. So having a narrator or someone that walks you through it, makes it more personable, helps. And it makes it much more interesting. I see that we have a lot of discussion here. And so Mary's saying our platform is really for internal staff. The videos can be found on our website. Oh, great. Thank you, Mary. And I see MSC is a desire, need for learning are my initial spurs, but it really helps when training is fun, too. Yes, fun. I think it can be fun. I think you can have, besides a character, I would say there's a fine line, and you should know your audience, whether you use cartoon characters or pictures of people. You can learn games. Games definitely engage learners. And one thing that really helps is reinforcing content through knowledge checks within the course. So you maybe have a section on the policy part 1, and after the narration and the little video of the manager and her staff, you stop for a second and say, hey, let's review, and you have a multiple choice or some sort of, well, at least in this case, knowledge check, and after that, you provide a debrief of the knowledge check. So you're reinforcing the content not just through the actual course, but through the questions and through the debrief, and then you can follow up at the end. And you certainly can have games. We've used Jeopardy a lot in many of the places I've worked. That might be a cultural thing that might not work outside the U.S. But questions and answers or gamification has been shown to engage learners much more. And Sheila's asking, taking into account Jenny and Deborah's comments, do I see online and in-person training as complementing each other or as separate? I think they do complement. They should be. It should be a blended approach, and that's another word you might or might not have heard. It's becoming more popular in terms of blending different solutions. So if you create a learning path, it makes it much more interesting to have a variety of ways to get to it. And within each of those, if I develop an online self-directed training, I will try to provide different ways the content can be presented. Those are similar to principles of universal design for learning that really has been implemented in K-12 and university settings. But I think it fits well in the international development field due to the different personalities. And the principles, there's 3 principles of universal design for learning, which would be provide multiple means of access. So when we talk about accessing content, you can provide it offline, be it in a printed form. You can provide it live, like through Adobe Connect. You can provide it in the self-directed online format. If, of course, that goes back to time and how much time you have to develop it, but that will get the most bang for your buck. It probably will not require much more or any budget. It's, of course, marketing and packaging. Hey, look, we've got these learning paths for you, and this is something I'm working on at ACDI Voca right now. So as a different ways to get to it, different ways for the user to show that they know the content, and that could be in knowledge checks or through games, or even if you have a session like this where you have a Q&A or a survey, and then different ways of rewarding the learner. And I can send you just if you look up CAST, I think it's .org, C-A-S-T, they originated Universal Design for Learning. But the gist of it is providing different ways of getting the message out, providing the content in as many ways as you can. And by that I mean you can have it printed through a live session and just reinforcing it. And you might want to check if that URL is correct. I should know that, but another thing is make it personal, as per my example of the policy training. How does it relate to me? That's always the question as you look at training. And as you're designing it, how will the staff or the audience, how will this make it important to them? Why should they be interested in what I'm trying to tell them? So those are some of just the kind of high-level tips. There's other things you can integrate. One thing we're doing is looking up Moocs, which I forget at this moment what that stands for, but it's the free online university courses that are very popular. There's different providers of that. Udemy, U-D-E-M-Y, yeah, Udemy, Allison.com, A-L-I-S-O-N, I believe, and someone might have to check that for me. You can just look up Moocs, which is capital M, capital O, capital O, capital C. That can spice up the mix. We look at what USAID has in their Learning Center and add those links also. Thank you, Missy. My brain was like, I knew this yesterday. But USAID has some good courses as well in their Learning Center that are free and available. I believe you might have to create an account, but we try to include those as well for motivation, and then we promote them through our newsletter. So there's no one right answer. It's really about, it's almost similar to cooking. If you like to cook and not follow a recipe, trying something out in terms of how you present the content. If you have the chance, if you are the one designing the content, or if you're the subject matter expert, think about different ways, or even I can look up probably next week some quick guidelines that are available to everyone to make, to engage learners as well. There's many resources out there, and there's many Moocs out there, but there's no one right mix. It depends on who your audience is, how you communicate. Of course, time and job is always going to be an issue, but marketing it and the content, and maybe reinforcing within the content, tying it back to what their daily job is. I've been to presentations where in my past lives, where the subject matter expert talks about their expertise and just divulges the information, and I have to work myself to figure out, okay, how can I apply this? And that's the main thing that you might want to think about as you develop your own content. So that's about content. So I was going to, if no one has questions, thank you for the ones so far. The last one is collaboration, which kind of fits into content if we're talking about courses that are online. If you have a discussion board, or if you have a private LinkedIn site or a Facebook group, or even depending on what you have in terms of, we have Office 365, which allows for the formation of groups. Collaboration is a great way to implement informal learning, and where people can just share. We've grouped them by having overall organization-wide groups, but then specific groups based on the job description or the job requirements. For example, our HR specialists across have their own private group where they can feel comfortable and don't have to put out their own questions to everyone. They can discuss it amongst themselves. It's part of the communication, so it kind of circles back. You can use whatever systems you have. You don't necessarily have to buy a new one. It's just really about communicating that these are there and piloting them with a smaller group. It can reinforce the message of what training's there. And definitely, Sheila, making people comfortable is key, which goes back to the IT support I was talking about. If you make them feel comfortable and make them feel that there's someone they can go to, not necessarily the IT desk, or maybe it is the IT desk, that someone's going to be there to help them and get over their frustration, that makes the world of difference. You can set up communities around training if people have time and want to discuss it, and or if it's required. You can facilitate exploration, but these groups are asynchronous, and some of our communities at ACDI VOCA, we have, they're private, but they have Adobe Connect sessions monthly to discuss specific topics and get together across the globe to who can. And of course we record it for those that can't geographically make it. So that is kind of a summary of some things that don't necessarily you don't need to buy new tools. Really just looking at the approach of how you message and communicate, how the content is set up, as well as how you can engage people in a different way than just a classroom, and more informally. How do I keep the training conversation going once the training ends? That depends. Sometimes it might not. The key to good communities is having a proactive owner of a community, which again goes back to communication. One of our private communities that I was just referencing, the owner is very proactive. They post different questions and work-related items, and then one or two people might join in and post their thoughts. But generally, it can become frustrating, and people give up sooner than they should, because if you don't see that people are posting, you think that they might not be participating. But what turns out to be true is many people lurk. There is some sort of the 1990 rule that is one person is the main facilitator of a community. 9 people might participate and the rest lurk, but they learn from it, and we find that they email the owner separately, the owner of the community, and he facilitates that information back into the community. For training, that might be, it might depend on what the training is, if there's actually a need to continue collaboration. So it really depends on the topic. From Erin, from an organizational perspective, is learning considered important at ACDI VOCA? Are there clear signals from senior leadership that staff can or should set aside time? Very good question. Learning is important, and we do have some senior leadership support. Of course, I would always like more, but that they do find training to be important, especially the mandatory training. And it's an ongoing process to keep senior leadership engaged from my point of view, so managing up, as well as keeping the staff involved as well. And some are self-perpetuating. In fact, we do have a COP community that's pretty active, both live through Adobe Connect sessions, and they have their own community. It takes a while to kick off. So it is an ongoing task of communication, and that really, I believe, is what helps get the message out, and that, like I said before, could be you. It could be you and others that you work with or identify, and making an effort to keep up communication. It's easy to get lost in tasks and forget to post in your community or to communicate or just keep. It almost sometimes feels like nagging to me. But I think sometimes people miss emails. You know, I don't think any of us could say that we don't get enough email. So, like I said, different ways, newsletters, things like that. So it is, clear signals will be mostly for mandatory, but I do work with senior leadership to get them involved with other communities and at least provide and help provide praise for those that have finished different certificate programs on their own. So it's a mixed bag, but it is really, it's an ongoing process. So I see Sheila is a proud lurker. And Tennessee says, do I need to show some kind of return on investment in order to receive funding, staff, or even interest? If so, how do I represent either effectiveness for staff or make attempts to quantify impact? Yes, great question. I'm a strong believer in showing return on investment, or at least usage. In training, in the field of training, return on investment is one of those elusive holy grails. It's not the thing most people do is to say, oh, so many people took training. And as we all know, that means nothing, because you can take training and you might have just flipped through it and it's not going to impact your work. So it is more costly to do follow-up and return on investment. There's Kirkpatrick 4 levels of evaluation that should ideally follow through up to a year after you've taken an important training. What I've done, I don't track how many people have taken what trainings. I do track more how many people have logged in, what they've looked at, and then I try to follow up with how I personally email them and ask how they've applied it to their job. It's a start, and I think you can't do return on investment for everything, especially if you have many self-directed online courses. But for the mandatory courses and those that you need, for example, like let's say you have a finance course that you need all your finance people to take, it would be critical to follow up and get ROI on that. I believe our finance department did that. So I'm a strong believer in ROI. I've created a report on the usage of our online learning management and social learning platform. And I set up benchmarks last year in 2014 for last year, and I'm following up to see if we met them. And one metric I found interesting is that we had a large increase in staff logging in and actually using courses and using the communities. I think that was a good start. I would like more metrics. So what other types of metrics did I use? I ran reports from our system, and that was more than we had before. Like I said, there's different forms of evaluating and getting metrics, and Kirkpatrick has, like I said, 4. One is your immediate. What did you get out of the training? Can you use it? That's more, I think, I call it a smiley sheet. I think others do too. What that means is, did you like the training? Do you think it will be useful? Now, that doesn't give you any kind of return on investment because you've just finished the course, and it will help you update the training to maybe make it more useful. Then there's second level would be something along the lines of following up with them in a month of how the content of the training worked. And then after that would be following up with after another period of time, and then with the manager and see if their performance improved. So that's a little more effortful, and I have not seen that used in my career that frequently. It's a great idea, and some organizations and federal agencies do try to follow up, but in terms of projects and budgets, that's something to consider when you build it in. I think the best metrics I've seen are not necessarily related to staff training, but what M&E monitoring and evaluation do and how they track project progress and learning and things on those projects. So I would like to get to that point. I can dream. All right, so I wanted to ask, what do you think? I know you've been typing during this, but are any of these things we've discussed or I've mentioned something that caught your attention or that you think you could spend a little more time on or implement? And if so, what? Some people are typing. A lot of it in terms of if you want to have ROI, you have to start thinking about implementing and planning it when you start developing the course, of how you would do that. If it's based on a project, how that would fit in. Maybe if you do have a monitoring and evaluation group, talk to them of what they're doing for the project. I've worked with our group a lot as well. Timothy says she likes the idea of making training more personal and emphasizing what's in it for me. That's one way to engage, but like I said, there's no one right solution, no one right mix. What I said at the FSN TOPS Knowledge Management meeting, what we discussed was you need to try out different things. Not everything's always going to work, but you have to try it before you know. And getting field and staff input is always good through small surveys. Mary said, setting up multiple community groups or specific staff, HRCOPs, it's a great idea. It is hard to use just a global discussion site unless it's a topic for us. Gender is global for everyone and people really are interested because it's a cross-cutting issue. But nobody will want to put info HR or COP info in a public group. So I would recommend trying it out, and don't get discouraged. It will take a lot of coaxing, nagging, persistence, perseverance, and finding out what they want to use the group for. And Sheila's writing, I like the discussion of having various options for training. We'll never get everyone in a room, that's very correct, or anyone take an online course. So options are good, and again, if planned, one of my big things is planning ahead. You can plan ahead and know which ways you're going to deliver this, and then it will be less time, it'll be more streamlined as you develop it. And the thing I love most about training and developing different solutions is that there's so many possibilities, especially in creating blended solutions, that what I find, the challenge I find is how do I make it work? How can I make this different or unique, like using what Mary said, YouTube, the 3-minute thing, the 3-minute sessions, something like that. How can I combine these in a different way? Test it out with some of the staff or a project or the learning champions and see what they think. But that I find to be the most interesting. How can I communicate this to them? What ways work, and how can I make it work better? So it's an ongoing, constant ongoing improvement process. And yeah, online can be used for quick reference and reinforcement. We have a whole section for just support aids and tools as well, not just training. I see MSC said, not sure how practical this would be, but we could follow up and see how we've used what we learned as an indicator of knowledge. I would, my next slide is, I'd be glad to, if you want to email me. I'm out of the office until next week, but I'd be glad to discuss further. If you have more specific questions you want to email just me, you can do that. I love working through ideas and solutions, or even just meeting for lunch if you're in the DC area.
Thank you, Ina. That was really insightful. There are a few tips and tricks there I think I'd like to try, and I'll let you know how I go on. Am I allowed to tell everyone where you're going today?
You can, yes.
So Ina has her commencement ceremony immediately after this, so I'd like to say a huge thank you to you. I know today is a huge day, but you've still given up your time to be here with us this morning.
Well,
Have a safe flight. Enjoy the ceremony.
Well, yeah, if we're flying to New Orleans, so that's going to be a bit tricky. But we'll see.
Why is that tricky?
So thank you everyone for coming. And
thank you, Ina. It's been really, really great having you.
I look forward to more discussion if anybody's interested.
Yes, please. So we are slightly running to the end of the time that we have together. So just some very quick updates. We had a workshop, how to develop a knowledge management strategy workshop last week. So we'll put all the resources that we used onto the FSN network, and we'll let you know when those are there. Our April meeting is set tentatively for the 28th. And this is a joint effort between the MNE and the KM task forces. Again, we're hoping it will be sort of really useful for us as we try to the two can work together. But we'll send you more information on that in a while. We're also working on revising online discussions on the FSN network, just as another way of sharing the learning and the experiences that we have within the task force. But again, we will let you know when these are up and running and how we move forward with those. I think that's all for the updates. As usual, please, if there is any topic that you'd like to share your experience with, during these KMTF meetings, do please let Sheila and I know, and we'll be happy to arrange a time where you can share your thoughts. And I think that's it from us on our end. Thank you for being here, everyone, and we'll see you hopefully in April.